Okay. Hey, everybody. Hey, everybody. Here we are live on Wednesday, and we're going to study Hebrews chapter 11 and Genesis chapter 16. So it is now 6 o'clock on the dot, and everything just works just right. Every button I pushed, everything I clicked went and brought us here. So I see we have one person in. If you are where you can sign in, I would like to see who's here with us today. So come in and sign in, please, as they used to say on, I forgot what that show was. What's My Line? That was this. Come in and sign in, please. If you are where you can chat, we want to see who you are. And if you have your Bibles, let's turn to Hebrews 11 and Genesis chapter 16. Since you are at your homes, you should have your Bible, shouldn't you? So I see from my reflection, the lighting is a little bit strong. And if you'll wait just a minute, I'm going to fix that. I'm going to turn on a side light and turn off the headlight. So wait just a minute, and then maybe it won't be so harsh. All right, there's that and that. And let's see if that helps us with our light. Oh, yes. That's a little bit. Whoa, now the window needs closed. Hold up. I can't get anything right today, but we will see how that is. Let me see. I apologize for this. No. Okay, we'll just have to do it like that. All right. Hello, Rhonda. Hello. Good to have you with us. I guess I spoke too soon that everything was working just right. But I'm ready to go if we can go with it. This light by me looks like a ghost or something is right there. And that's just a lamp. So maybe I just wondered, maybe I could scoot this way. No, because it's okay. Maybe we could try it this way. I'm sorry for this jumping up and down and all of this. I've not had this kind of light trouble. There we go. Let's try that. Okay. Now I think that's better. So I think you need a better setup. Well, I thought this was perfect until all of a sudden it just wasn't. So, all right. So good to have everybody here. Again, what we want to do is look at Genesis chapter 16 and look at Hebrews chapter 11. I'm so glad you came here with us, and maybe some more people will chime in as we go. It's just 6:03, but I guess if we were at the building, we'd be fumbling around getting things set up here, there, and everywhere too. So that's just part of starting something. Okay, so today we're going to continue our study of the Hall of Fame of the Faithful in Hebrews chapter 11. So I'm going to look at this, and let's go to Hebrews 11, and we're going to do something today on verses 11 and 12 of Hebrews 11. Today we're going to say some things about Sarah. By faith, Sarah herself also received strength to conceive seed, and she bore a child when she was past the age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. Therefore, from one man, and him as good as dead, were born as many as the stars of the sky in multitude, innumerable as the sand which is by the seashore. So today we're going to be moving on in our study of Hebrews 11 to verses 11 and 12. I see that Wendy is here with us. Hey, Wendy, how you doing? So good to have you. And we're going to look at Sarah today and some important things about Sarah. When we are in Genesis 16, her name is still Sarai. And Sarai's name was changed to Sarah, but Sarai is not at the place Sarah, when her name was later changed, is in Hebrews chapter 11. By faith, Sarah received strength to conceive seed, and she bore a child when she was past the age. Now, look at this next part. Because she judged him faithful who had promised. That is not where she is, unfortunately, in Genesis chapter 16. Now, in Genesis, we see Abram having made some mistakes, and we're going to see Sarah making some mistakes. So, Abram and Sarah, very godly people, but human. And what happens in Genesis chapter 16 literally changed the entire world. And by that, I mean even today, and we'll look at that a little later. Genesis chapter 16 is a pivotal turning point for world history, if ever there were some. Genesis chapter 16 is a lesson of opening the floodgate, the Pandora's box, however you want to call it, and how that sin can lead to other sins, and there's no such thing as a small sin. So good to have Drew Zaster here with us too. And if you're here, please come in. And we have several. Two of our watchers are at Camp Maywood. That would be Tori and Anna Laura. And they are, with half the amount of people, are going. They're trying a week of camp, and more power to them. I hope very good comes from that. We looked at the state guidelines at Indian Creek, and we decided not to. They were very difficult for us with our setup to do. I hope Maywood can do what they're doing and doing it legally. And we also need to pray that their decision does not backfire on them, and that everybody goes down there and doesn't come back with the COVID. So anyway, that's where they are. And we're going to go now to Genesis. And Angie, Lacey, and Angie are here. Hey there, good to have y'all. We're going to go to Genesis chapter 16, and I'm going to read this chapter now in its entirety. And it's a short chapter, 16 verses for the 16th chapter. Let's read. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had borne him no children, and she had an Egyptian maidservant whose name was Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, "See now, the Lord has restrained me from bearing children. Please go in to my maid. Perhaps I shall obtain children by her." And Abram heeded the voice of Sarai. Then Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan. So he went in to Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress became despised in her eyes. Then Sarai said to Abram, "My wrong be upon you. I gave my maid into your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, I became despised in her eyes. The Lord judged between you and me. So Abram said to Sarai, Indeed, your maid is in your hand. Do to her as you please. And when Sarai dealt harshly with her, she fled from her presence. Now the angel of the Lord found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, by the spring on the way to Shur. And he said, Hagar, Sarai's maid, where have you come from? And where are you going? She said, I am fleeing from the presence of my mistress Sarai. The angel of the Lord said to her, Return to your mistress and submit yourself under her hand. Then the angel of the Lord said to her, I will multiply your descendants exceedingly, so that they shall not be counted for multitude. And the angel of the Lord said to her, Behold, you are with child, and you shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your affliction. He shall be a wild man. His hand shall be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. Then she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, You are the God who sees. For she said, Have I also here seen him who sees me? Therefore the well was called Beer Lahai Roi. Observe, it is between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram named his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. So here we are with several things going on in one chapter. So let's talk about this. A lot to talk about, a lot of repercussions, a lot of consequences that, like I say, still filter down to this day and time in 2020 from Genesis chapter 16. So let's look at Genesis chapter 16, and let's just take a few things here of interest. That Abram, remember when we left Abram was concerned. So let's do a little review question, okay? Who was Abram's heir before Isaac, before Ishmael, before anybody? Who was Abram's heir to everything that he had? It was not Lot. It was someone else. So I'm going to see if you remember from last chapter. Who was Abram's heir? Let's see what we get coming in. Who was Abram's heir before Isaac, before Ishmael, before Isaac? Who was Abram's heir? If you're at home, turn and talk and see what you can find out. The answer will not be in chapter 16. It'll be in Genesis 15. This is a review. Yay, Bert Fuller's here with us. Hey, Bert. And Bert says, the guy from Damascus. Yes. Now, what was the guy's name? Very good. What was the guy's name? See if anybody can get his name. He was from Damascus. All right, let's see if I can give you the verse. Go to Genesis chapter 15 and look at verse 2. Genesis 15, verse 2. Who was Abram's heir before Isaac, before Ishmael? Genesis 15, verse 2. Let's see who this guy from Damascus, what's his name? Hmm. Bert sent me a smiley face. Made me really smile. Eliezer. Yes, Rhonda Gerganis got it. Eliezer from Damascus was Abram's first heir. And Abram was concerned about this. He didn't, excuse me, he didn't have an heir except for him. And he was a trusted servant. He had status in Abram's eyes, but he really, you can tell, I don't believe Abram wanted Eliezer to be his uh, child or his heir. He saw that this would be the way it would be legally, but it seems here 10 years has gone by and the promised son did not arrive. They're getting old, a lot of disappointments, no doubt. And Sarai, too, shares her husband's disappointments, maybe even more so. And Sarah gets this idea that we can help God out a little bit. This can be dangerous, right? Sometimes when we say, hey, I'm going to help God out a little bit. And so Sarah had an idea. And what was that idea? So here's another question. What was Sarai's idea for her and Abram to have an heir? Sarah had an idea. I read it in our chapter. What was Sarai's idea? She had a good idea, she thought. And what was Sarai's idea? To give, good, Rhonda, to give her handmaiden to Abram. And that would be the heir. And Hagar, this is not very good, very good. Hagar was the handmaiden's name, and her idea, Sarah's idea, was to give this Hagar, give this handmaiden to Abram, and then this way they could have. Maybe she thought it wouldn't be through her. Don't know all what was going through Sarai's mind, but looking at this, we see that uh, Abram listened to her, and Sarai took Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, gave her to her husband, Abram, to be his wife. And this was after 10 years. So 10 years have gone by, they're disappointed. And he goes into Hagar and she conceives. So let's look at that and see what we can find out. One good question that we have to ask is, where did they get this Egyptian handmaid? Well, most likely it would be a gift, perhaps, or something that, as they purchased slaves back then, someone that they had bought in Egypt. And this was probably when Abram was in Egypt, and there he sinned, didn't he, by telling a lie. He would have probably gotten Hagar there, and I don't know where any other source she could have come from. That's very likely, though. But there he went in sin in Egypt. There, he did some sin there. Sin can compound if, and this is a if, but if Hagar was a gift from Pharaoh, then we know why he was giving him gifts, because Abram lied. But anyway, they had been through Egypt and they could have purchased her. They could have received her as a gift. But it looks as if this would be the best place for them to have gotten Hagar. And they brought back with him from Egypt great wealth, including men servants and maid servants. So one of those maid servants that they got very likely was this Hagar that is Ishmael's mother. So we see in Genesis chapter 15, they're really letting their faith, Abram and Sarai are really letting their faith go down quite a bit because they're jumping the gun and they're saying, hey, this is what we need to do. It's been 10 years, we've not had any children. And so this is what they do. They go and they get Hagar. And if you notice, none of this is done to the pleasing of Hagar. In other words, Hagar had no word into it and had no say so. She was a handmaiden. She was a second class citizen, or even more down the line. And looking at this, we see that he goes into Hagar. Again, Hagar has no choice. Hagar is really one of the ones that I feel sorry for in the Bible because of her lot she was given. But she turned out to be able to do something that Sarai could not do until this time, and that was be able to give birth to a child. And so here we have her despising Sarai. All of a sudden, Hagar is no longer second class. She's kind of got a one up, got an edge on her mistress, and her mistress was despised in her eyes. And we look at this whole situation and where we are right now. We need to remember that God does not need human help to fulfill his promises. Yes, we need to trust in God. What's required of us is that we obey him and that we do what he says. But to fulfill a promise that he has given, like this one in this category, would be to try to maybe help God in another part of his promises. Well, for example, the Lord promised he would not send a flood on the earth that would destroy the whole world by flood. He doesn't need our help in that promise. He's going to take care of that. That's one of those promises that is in God's court totally. And this kind of promise that Abram received from God is in that same category. And what's required of man is that we trust God no matter how impossible it seems and how the fulfillment of his promise may appear to be. We need to trust God. Now, in time, Abram was to learn that when he got Isaac and he went and he offered Isaac, God, of course, revealed himself to be totally trustworthy to him. But Abram and Sarah let their faith slide, it seems, in this chapter. And Sarai, that is, who bare him no children, gave him this handmaid. And looking at all of this that went on, really what is wrong with it? I want to look at a few things that can tell us what is wrong with it. In fact, in this day and time, this was a legal and commonly accepted practice, the customs of that age. And we really can hardly suppose that Abram and Sarah just deliberately said, we're going to violate God's law. But there's a number of things that were wrong here. The first thing is that this violated the concept that God had from the beginning, that it was man and wife, monogamous, that is one man, one wife marriage, instead of polygamous, polygamy, one to many. And the idea from the beginning, we'll find Jesus saying later from the beginning, that it was man and woman, Adam and Eve. There were not several more. And here we have this concept that God has given of a monogamous marriage, and this is violated. Now, let me ask you this. We know that Abraham, he was not the only one to go and take for him more than one wife. So let's draw back from our background knowledge of Bible characters. Who else in the Bible had more than one wife? Let's see if we can name some. So if you can think of some characters who had more than one wife, put some of them in. Who else in the Bible, just like Abraham, had more than one wife? So I'm going to wait and see what answers we get. Who else do we have that had more than one wife? Let's see. Okay. Jacob. Yes, Jacob with Rachel and Leah. All right. Who else? Let's see who else we can come up with that had more than one wife. All right. David. Yes. David had several wives, didn't we? Have David and Bathsheba, David and Michal. Some more. I believe I forgot now who all some of them were. But David had more than one wife, didn't he? Okay, very good. Can we name any more that had more than one wife? Solomon. Yes, Solomon had more than one wife. Solomon had more than one wife, to say it mildly. Oh, 700 wives, 300 concubines, I believe was the number. You will see Genesis chapter 4 and verse 19. Another man who had more than one wife. If you're looking, there's a place to go. Genesis chapter 4 and verse 19. Someone we sometimes forget. Who in Genesis chapter 4 and verse 19 had more than one wife? And verse 23 mentions their name too. Lamech, very good. Yes, Lamech had two wives as well. And we have this continuation, especially before, though, but from Abram on. And we have these people who are getting more than one wife. I'm going to say something that my dad pointed out one time. God tolerated this polygamy. He didn't like it so much. But every time you see these men with more than one wife, you see trouble with it. With all of these men who had more than one wife, you see trouble. And the trouble brewing from a lot of times the fact that they had more than one wife. Now, with Lamech, Adah, and Zillah, Lamech himself was a cause of trouble as he had killed somebody. But looking at this with David and Bathsheba, there was trouble because of David, but there's trouble in the household. There's trouble with David and Michal. There was trouble with Solomon and his wives who led him astray to following idols. There was trouble with Rachel and Leah, with Jacob, and these times that they had polygamy, you really had a lot of trouble, didn't you? You really had something going on that might not have happened if we would not have had but one wife. And here's the thing going on with Sarah, Hagar, and Abram. And Sarah has come up with this idea, but Abram listened to her. So it was sinful in that this violated the concept of monogamous marriage. And that was the plan from the beginning, Jesus said. Another thing I mentioned a while ago, it was a sinful use of a slave girl, and she was hardly in a position to deny this that was demanded of her. She had to fulfill the personal desires of Abram and Sarai. And such a, just to put it mildly, inconsiderate's not the word, just trampling over her, trampling over one's fellow human beings for their own purposes. Anytime that happens, it never leads to anything but sin, things that are sinful. And so that's another way that this violated God's law. Several things that are wrong here. One of them is how Hagar is, and we sometimes forget her in the picture. Also, there's a presumption, and this is a third thing. There's a presumption that, and this on the part of Abram and Sarah, that God could not fulfill his promise except through their human devices. Now, there are times, like for example, if I pray for a good crop, I have to go work the fields. But there, in that situation, is a case where man has his part, God does his part. But here was a promise that required or was given no commandment, like Noah. Noah was going to be saved from the flood, but Noah was told to build the ark. And there was no telling of Abram, you're going to have a son, but it's not going to be through Sarai. They jumped the gun, so to speak, and went and did this all on their own. Now, this introduction of what they did continues on and had a lot of consequences through, for example, Jacob. And I believe if we get on down to it, it seems like Moses had Zipporah and then the Cushite. There's another discussion there that I don't want to get into right now. But looking at this, the sin that they did, the ball is rolling, and not many good things are happening because of what they've done. Now, Hagar, the name itself, I'm told, means flight, Flight, flight. And this flight that she takes is even compared, and the word is akin to the word Hagera, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, but the flight of Muhammad from uh, Medina to Mecca. If you remember studying that in history, 622 AD, when he did that, the time period that the Muslims date their era. This word flight that they have is the same, it's the kin to this that Hagar did when she fled from her mistress. And looking at this, of course, the posterity of Hagar are the proponents of Islam. And so the nations that came through Hagar, they were enemies of the Jews throughout history and even still today. And not only of the Jews, but of the Christians. And this is what I'm saying when what they're doing in Genesis 16 affected the world today. Little could Abram and Sarai have known what Pandora's box they were opening for all mankind just by this little maneuver that's recorded here in Genesis chapter 16. It is a pivotal point in human history because here we have the beginning of the Ishmaelites, the Arabs. We have several nations are going to come from him too. And we have all this trouble that is going on. And Sarah and Abram could not have counted on such a development as what even happened right afterward when Hagar was with child. And Hagar looks at Sarah and looks down on her. And so what we have is a slave elevated up. And that could happen too. In fact, that's even listed in in earlier manuscripts of ancient texts and not just scriptural texts. The Code of Hammurabi, for example, mentions it warns expressly that a slave girl elevated by her mistress should not and could not claim equality. So you have a lot of jealousy here. You have the slave girl who's got one up on the mistress because she has children where her mistress could not, but you have the mistress who has the position of power, and that's not going to leave from her either because she was Abram's first wife. And so there's nothing but trouble going on here. And there, one is just, both of them are despised by each other, really. And now, with Hagar having this child, it would be a natural thing for her to think, well, my child is going to inherit Abram's fortune because now you have no children, Sarai. I am with child, and what I bring into this world is going to take the place of Eliezer. And here's just all of these things coming into play with what would be thought by each one of them. And very likely that Hagar herself could have gotten proud. Well, she despised Sarai. So we do see pride in Hagar. And this is something now, it cannot be overlooked, it cannot be ignored. And so Sarai goes to Abram, and my wrong be upon you. Uh, the whole house is troubled with this. That's what happens when we all try to satisfy our own desires and purposes outside of God's plan, using others and everything that they're doing here. And Abram is really powerless to find a solution to this problem. In reality, there was no solution. The solution came before we got with Hagar, but we ignored that solution. He should have, like Job said, no, you speak as the foolish women speak. Instead, he did like Adam did and listened to his wife. But now there's no solution anymore, that there's a solution to the conflicts that are between these two nations of people now. We have Arab Israeli conflicts, and that's troubling the whole world, and it's still going on. And as Hagar was Sarai's property, and since the whole situation was due to Sarai's suggesting it first, her initial suggestion, then Abram just turned the problem back over to Sarai. Okay, you you go and you deal with it. Now, looking at this, it's funny how Sarai comes up to him, almost like this wrong is your fault. This is your fault, Abram. That could be, and yet some people have said that might not be exactly what she meant. That's definitely what it looks to be. But either way, she had anger. She was angry. She had wounded pride. She had herself in a big pickle, and whatever the meaning was, she was not happy. My wrong be upon thee could also mean my wrong be something you need to handle now. What I've done, I need you to fix. That's another meaning of it. Either way, whatever the meaning is, my wrong be upon thee. Whether she's trying to get saying this is my wrong, your turn now to fix it, or my wrong is your fault. None of them are good. And Abram doesn't really respond very well because he says, well, you take care of it. That's not yours. Oh, I'm sorry, I did not see this. Lacey asked if Methuselah did. We are not told, and I'm guessing you're asking if Methuselah had more than one wife. We are not told who Methuselah's wife or wives were. That is something the Bible does not reveal to us. And it's possible that he did. He was 969 when he died. So, and he could have had more than one wife by outliving some. That's a very good question, and something I've never thought about. That's an interesting thing to think about. And I guess it would have to be one of those secret things that belong to the Lord, because we're not told this side of eternity. So, I don't know. That's a very good thought. I've never thought about Methuselah as to how many wives he had. We know he had posterity, so definitely he was not unmarried, or at least without a woman. So, but looking on at what goes on. Sarah is so harsh to Hagar that Hagar leaves. And here's where our heart opens for Hagar, because she goes out and she flees from her presence. But an angel finds her. Now she's going to flee again. There's going to be a second time that she flees, and this is not that time. But he finds her by a spring of water in the wilderness. And this angel says, "Where have you come from? Where are you going?" And Hagar tells him, "I'm fleeing from my mistress Sarah." And he says, "Go back to your mistress." But look what he says in verse 9: "Submit yourself under her hand." Go back, but don't go back despising her. Go back as her servant, her slave, her servant. Submit yourself. And he says, "I will multiply your descendants greatly." The fate of many nations at that time was in the hand of Hagar. Had she not submitted, well, that's very possible that that promise would have not been even made, or definitely would have been kept. But he said, "Return and submit under her hand. I will multiply your descendants greatly, so that they shall not be counted for multitude." Now let's go back. Abraham, remember, Abram was promised, your descendants, they will be as the sand of the seashore. They will be as the stars of the sky. But this is also told to Hagar. From Abram, we have two sets of nations coming, both of them so numerous. Let's not forget, when we count the Jews as Abraham's descendants, we also have to count the descendants of Ishmael too. And they were very many. But look at verses 11 and 12. "And the angel of the Lord said to her, Behold, you are with child, and you shall bear a son. You shall call his name Ishmael." Now let me stop right there. Ishmael literally means God hears. God heard. God heard what's going on, this affliction, as he said, because the Lord has heard your affliction. Now verse 12. "He shall be a wild man. His hand shall be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren." Every man's hand against him, his hand against every man. Every man. This is what we see. This is what we see even going on. He himself would be in his presence, in the presence of his brethren, but as a wild man, his hand would be against every man's hand. We see this today. We see the bitterest foes throughout history between the Arabs, the Israelites, and others. And the foes of those, the people whose hands are they're against it. Here it is prophesied that this would happen, and today that is so fulfilled over such a long period of time, and that's the way that God said it would be. Now, once again, Sarai and Abram should not have jumped the gun and done this thing. I don't know, when we go to seeing who caused this, we don't know exactly Hagar's, I hate to say, blame in this in God's eyes. When we look at Joseph later on, Joseph was approached by Potiphar's wife. Joseph too was property. Joseph was desired by her, and she wanted him to lie with her. Joseph said no. Joseph didn't do it. But here's Hagar, an Egyptian, very likely, I mean, when 9 times out of 10 probability here, not raised to honor the one true God, not with the morals that Joseph had. But I do wonder, have to, what if Hagar had stood up and said no? I do not know. Of course, this was different in this day and time in the shoes of a woman. And she, being a woman, being a slave, if she had said no, we don't know how good that would have done. I do wonder. We can never tell, though, of course. But Joseph said no. Joseph was in similar circumstances as Hagar. And had Hagar said no, I wonder if much trouble could have been spared there, which is something that we don't know, but something to think about. And so she, at this time, though, Hagar does have faith in God. And she calls the name of the Lord who spoke to her. Look at this. You are the God who sees. And then she says something very pertinent to her situation, but almost spine chilling to me today. Have I also here seen him who sees me? You think of that. We know God sees us. His eyes are upon the ways of man. But to know, to see him, of course, we know that we call this says the angel of the Lord. For all she knows, she asked the question, have I seen him who sees me? If she didn't have faith in the one true God, she definitely has it after this encounter. And she names the she called the name of the Lord who spoke to her, you are the God who sees. The God who sees. Wow. And so the well where she is, this spring of water that she names Bir Leah Roy, the well of the one who lives and sees me. She gives the well a name. And remember, again, Moses is writing this. And here we have sort of a set aside, like you'd call it in acting, breaking the fourth wall, perhaps. Observe, it is between Kadesh and Bered, almost as if Moses, now the narrator, therefore the well was called Bir Lehi Roy. Observe, it is between Kadesh and Bered. It's still here today, at the time he wrote it. And so Hagar bore Abram a son. Abram named his son, whom Hagar bore Ishmael. So how would he know this? Well, Hagar could have told him for sure what he saw. Well, I'm sorry, what she saw with the angel, and named his son Ishmael. He's 86 at this time, and Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram. Now, at this time in Hebrews 11, what we read about Sarah, what we read has not yet happened, because we read by faith, Sarah herself also received strength to conceive seed, and she bore a child. Now, what I want to do in our next class, because what we're talking about is Sarah. We talked about Abram, and we talked about how Abram had such good faith and all. Hebrews 11 also mentions Sarah. At this time, Abram and Sarah, faith's a little weak, okay? They're not really where they need to be. The whole world has been impacted by this. And in chapter 17, if you want to just look there right quick, we have another giving of the covenant, another sign of this covenant. And looking at this in chapter 17, their names are changed. If you want to look there, in the middle of that chapter, Sarai in verse 15 would not be called Sarai, but Sarah. shall be her name. Her name was changed, which literally means a princess. Sarah means princess. Abram's name was changed to Abraham instead of Abram. And this is in verse 5. No longer shall your name be Abram, but it shall be Abraham. Abraham meaning father of a multitude, and Abram meaning exalted father. So he's not just an exalted father, he'll be the father of a multitude. And says, I have made you father of many nations. And even this, Abraham laughed, and he wanted Ishmael. And I'm in chapter 17 and verse 18. Oh, that Ishmael might live before you. But God said in verse 19, no, Sarah, your wife, shall bear you a son, and you shall call his name Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his descendants after him. Now, God is so good. He doesn't leave Ishmael out. And he even tells Abram, as for Ishmael, I've heard you. Behold, I have blessed him and will make him fruitful and will multiply him exceedingly. He shall beget 12 princes, and I will make him a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, and Sarah shall bear to you at this time next year. And he finished talking with him, and God went up from Abraham. So now in 17, we have this covenant and we have circumcision introduced. We have Abram, a few more years have passed. Abraham, he is 99. And when we see them again, we're going to go to chapter 18. And I'm going to begin with chapter 18, again, talking about Sarah. I'm not going through all the characters of the Old Testament. I am going through Hebrews 11, and we're going to talk next week about the angels coming and talking to Sarah. And Sarah's faith is different later on than it was what we talked about tonight. So, Lord willing, we will continue our study on the Hebrews 11 characters, and that is Sarah. And I'm so glad that you joined us and tuned in with us. And what I would like to do, we have a prayer list on Dovertown Lifelines. I will give you, though, just a little bit of time if you would like to type in any prayer requests that you have that would be beneficial for us to pray tonight. So, if you have any prayer requests, if you would put those here. I didn't get any last week, and if you think of it later and want to put it on the Dovertown Lifelines, that's fine. So does anybody have any prayer requests? Okay, I don't have any coming in, and I waited a little bit. So what we're going to do is, let's remember, we will meet Sunday at 11, Lord willing. There has been a spike up of the COVID cases in our area. If we need to change that meeting for some reason, I will try to let you know by the calling post. And we, as of now, are going to continue to meet following our social distancing guidelines. We have masks at the back for you to wear. And when I say at the back, at the foyer when you come in, we have masks for you to get or bring your own. And we have the rows to where there's skipped a place in between them, hopefully where we won't catch anything if somebody happens to contract the coronavirus. So I see no prayer requests. So if you will pray with me, and we'll go to God in prayer. Our Father in heaven, thank you for giving us your word and the study of what happened with Abraham and Sarah, and with Hagar, with Isaac, with Ishmael, with all of these things. Thank you for declaring to us the history of this world in that. But thank you, Father, most of all, for keeping your promises. Father, help us to remember that you will keep your promises, and help us to trust in you to do so. Be with us now as we go through this week. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I want to say good night to everybody. I appreciate all of the participation with the answering of the questions and all. And hopefully we'll get to see on Sunday morning at 11. If not, we will be on YouTube again, Lord willing, Sunday afternoon at 2. And we can see you there. And we hope to worship God with you again Sunday morning. And everybody have a good week. And be careful, be safe. And I'll just stop our stream right here. I love you all. May God bless you.